Hello, everybody. It is time for our beginner track session number 3 today. It's called Getting Started with the Knowledge Aware Approach. Again, repetitive information if you've been with us for the first and second sessions, but my name is Jim Pietrowicz. I'm the Director of Business Development for Auros Knowledge Systems, and our presenter today is Josh Kullis. Josh is the Technical Services Manager for Auros Knowledge System, as well as our Knowledge Aware Consultant. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box to your right. We encourage that. And at the end of the session, I will be putting in a link to a quick survey so you can give us our feedback about the presentation. And again, if there's anything we can do, if anybody else is having technical issues, I put it in the last chat, but I just want to mention it again. You can reach out to us directly. In the chat, there is a comment from the IKAA enthusiast. They can help you. And the main stage appears to be working great. So if this is not working for you for any reason, feel free to go to the main stage and check out the content there, and we will get you a recording of all of this content when it's available after the conference. Apologies again for keep talking about this subject, but it is what it is. Anyway, with that said, I'll turn it over to Josh. Josh, why don't you take it away? We can see your screen. It looks great.
Perfect. All right. So the presentation here is getting started. So we talked a little bit about the fundamentals. We talked about knowledge models, and now kind of the next conversation in the sequence of this topic is, okay, I see some value in that, but how do we actually accomplish it at our organization? So I'll go through some of the learning points. Whoops. That's not the right way. Yeah. All right. So the first thing that we'll talk about is an activity that we call a briefing. We'll then go into what's called a seed scoping session. So we call the onboarding of a new workflow a seed project. So we want to scope that project out. Then we'll actually execute the seed project. We'll talk a little bit about production footprint, then adjacency development, demand-driven growth, and then enterprise capability, which is ultimately what we're looking to achieve. So if we start off with our briefing, this is an activity where our application engineers or some of our technical experts will facilitate a conversation with individuals at your organization. And essentially what we're trying to do is provide an overview of the knowledge aware concept, identify potentially opportunities or benefits that it could provide to your group. And coming out of the briefing, the general objective or the deliverable that we're looking to accomplish is we want to have interest of influential stakeholders. So a lot of times we'll do multiple different briefings at organizations at different levels of the organization. So we may talk to executives, we may talk down to end users and anyone between those two levels within maybe the decision chain. And the idea here is to kind of communicate the concept of knowledge aware, and generate some interest, identify if it could be valuable for an organization. And if it is valuable, at the end of the briefing, we're looking for the interest of those influential stakeholders. So the second step in our process is going to be the seed scoping session. This is a little bit more of a formal event, and a lot of times when we have these seed scoping sessions, because we actually call it something and it seems to be more formal, they can kind of be intimidating to a certain extent. But what we're looking to do is, now that we've identified some areas that you could potentially get value out of the knowledge aware approach, we want to start to understand, okay, where can we get value, the most amount of value maybe in the shortest amount of time or with the least amount of effort, or how do we understand how much time it would take to maybe make an impact in a certain area that we see a lot of potential in. So the seed scoping session, we're going to try to start small. We want to identify a group that we can kind of prototype the workflow with, identify the different areas that we may be able to go into, And ultimately, what we're trying to do as we go through this scoping session is produce a charter. And that charter is going to be used for a couple of different reasons. One, it's going to be a document that captures the value, the timing, the people that will be involved with a potential seed project. And then as that gets captured, this scoping session produces this charter, and that charter can be used as a communication document. So not only does it kind of define the details of the actual seed project, but then it can be used internally as a communication piece to communicate the value and the timing and so on and so forth. The next step in the process is the actual seed project itself. So this is where our team of application engineers would come in. We'd learn about the process, identify the roles that are associated with the process internally, identify some of the potential gaps or the challenges that the team is facing, beyond the information in the charter, understand how the information flows from one party to the next. While all of that's happening, we're also educating the customer team on the concepts of Auros, how the features work, how they can be used, the best practices around configuring them. And ultimately what we're trying to get to is a production ready footprint where we can show value, we can show tangible value. There's a configuration in the software that will be able to demonstrate and kind of show how it can benefit the workflow moving forward. Once that seed project is complete, the next aspect of the process of getting started is being in production, having a production footprint. So throughout the seed project, we're establishing a production ready workflow. Once we have that workflow, we put together a transition to production plan, and then that transition to production plan gets executed, and we start to have the group or the workflow being facilitated through the configurations in Auros. So we're collecting data in that normalized fashion. We're potentially producing knowledge models, and we're being able to kind of establish that data footprint that we can learn from continuously down the road. So what ends up typically happening as we start to get this production footprint, we're showing value, there's benefit that the group can see. And as we're going through that transition to production phase, we're trying to identify other opportunities where the knowledge-aware approach could be beneficial to the group. So identifying those opportunities could happen during a seed scoping session, and we just determined that we're not going to focus on certain areas during the seed. We could identify them during the seed project as we learn a little bit more about the process. Groups learn a little bit more about the software. We could learn about these adjacent opportunities. And as we start to implement in production, groups get more familiar with the software, with the value that it can bring. The next step after that first workflow has been transitioned to production, or sometimes in parallel with that transition, is this concept of adjacency development. So the adjacent development is going to be, in a lot of ways, very similar to the first four steps, and we're just kind of repeating them. So we'll look for these opportunities. If we need to conduct briefings, educate stakeholders on the potential value, scope out what a project may look like, then obviously execute the project, and then transition it into production so that we can get realized value. So the adjacency is expanding that footprint, showing how this knowledge-aware approach can provide some benefit for multiple different stakeholders within the organization, multiple processes, multiple organizational units or product groups or functional groups. But it's really just a repetition of the briefing, the seed project, and the production footprint. The next step in our process is something that we call demand-driven growth. So there's a subtle difference between adjacency development and demand-driven growth. And the main thing is, during adjacency, we're going out, we're looking for opportunities. There are a lot of briefings that are happening to kind of educate the organization on the value of the knowledge-aware approach, how it can logistically be implemented, those types of things. And there's a lot of promoting the concept and going out and kind of selling it to a certain degree. As we start to accomplish these adjacent developments, and we don't only have one workflow, but maybe there's 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 different workflows, different stakeholders within the organization start to understand the value without a briefing, right? Because they're able to see it in a lot of different scenarios. So we get to this point where we go from adjacent development, where we're selling the concepts, to this next step that we call demand-driven growth. And that demand-driven growth is essentially, instead of us going out looking for opportunities and trying to sell different stakeholders on them, it kind of, that paradigm shifts, and we start to have individuals who come and are approaching the people who are using the knowledge-aware approach, using the software, and saying, I have these different use cases. I think it could be valuable. In that scenario, we may conduct some briefings if there are other individuals within that domain that maybe are not familiar with the approach. But then we typically will conduct these scoping sessions as well. We want to be able to frame out a project so it's successful, it's clear what we're trying to achieve and when we're going to achieve it. Then we'll execute the seed project and eventually transition it over to production. So the getting started aspect really starts off small. We talk about organic growth, start small, and it starts to grow over time. That demand-driven growth is really the last step in this process. And then eventually, as additional workflows get implemented, the deliverable or the outcome of this demand-driven growth is the enterprise capability. So this is essentially where groups are using the knowledge-aware approach, they're getting benefit from it, they're continuously learning, and it just kind of becomes part of the fabric of the organization. So enterprise capability really doesn't have a whole lot of activity in it. It's really the output of the demand-driven growth over time. So that's kind of the process of this getting started. I know a lot of that was at a high level, and we didn't talk about specific details within some of those activities. So I guess, does anyone have any questions about the process of getting started?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I know it sounds easy, and it really is. I think the biggest challenge is getting to the right people in your organizations that are willing to adopt change, right? Because change is hard. None of us like that. I think that's the number one struggle that we at Auros have is finding those right people and really getting them to understand that this, although this change is a little bit challenging at the beginning, it can pay off huge dividends down the road for you. And like Jeff said at his opening presentation, which I'm hoping all of you heard, the timetable of this adoption is different, and it varies the pace based on the size of your organization. That doesn't mean it takes longer for a big organization and less time for a small organization, but that is one of the many factors that come into play. So yes, if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat. We definitely have some time to answer those. And we appreciate your attendance in all three sessions today. Hopefully you found them valuable. Josh, thank you for all the presentations. I know this is always good. Even though I've heard it a million times, it's always good for me to hear it again. And I'm sure some folks got some good knowledge out of it as well. While we're waiting for any possible questions to come in, I'm going to put one more survey link up in the chat. I would appreciate it if you guys could take a minute and just fill this out. Again, it's just a quick couple of questions on SurveyMonkey. And again, it will help us to improve the overall conference as well as these sessions as we move forward in the future years. Hopefully next year we can get this back into an in-person format or maybe even a hybrid format. I mean, we've all sort of changed over the last couple of years, but we do appreciate your attendance and your participation. I don't see any questions coming in, Josh. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that we need to?
No, I think we're all set.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no questions from the group, our next session is going to be at 3:25. So you have some time for a late lunch or a mid-afternoon snack. It's about 26 minutes away. That will be back on the stage area. So on the left-hand column of the screen, above where we are now in sessions, it says stage. If you go back into there at around 3:25 or a little bit beforehand, you will all be together again for the afternoon. The next session is entitled Auros and Auros IQ, Walking the Walk. So that should be an interesting one as well.